This is the ongoing series in which I attempt to work my way through the entire original Game Boy library, 3 games at a time. In each episode, I'll talk about one game that I like and one game that I don't. And finally, a third mystery game that could be good or it could be bad. All I can say for sure is that it will certainly be Game Boy. This is the good, the bad, and the Game Boy. Batman the video game is one of the very best games on the NES, and it happens to be one of the best games on the Game Boy as well. Batman seems to often get compared to Super Mario Land. While I myself probably would have never thought to make that connection, I guess I can see these similarities. The size of the characters and the basic structure of the stages is definitely similar, and there's also a heavy emphasis in both games on breaking blocks. The big difference there is that Mario breaks blocks with his fist, whereas Batman blows them up with his gun. Yeah, in this game, Batman skips all the fisticuffs that he uses in the other games and just runs around shooting up Gotham City. You might say that this isn't the most accurate portrayal of the character, and you'd be right. I don't know, the best justification I can offer is because video game. Batman starts out with the basic bat gun, but by destroying blocks you can find various power-ups to upgrade it to a laser, what seems to be a grenade launcher, the wave beam from Metroid, or the more character-appropriate battering weapon, which is awesome, by the way. This is my favorite weapon in the game. You can also level up your weapons by collecting these gun icons, which increases the number of projectiles you can fire at once. There's also an icon that lets you level down your weapons too, if that's your thing. I don't know, it's probably best to avoid that one. There's also a very useful bat shield that blocks enemy projectiles and defeats enemies. You can have up to 4 of these equipped at a time. And most importantly, you can also find B icons that, just like the NES game, provide you with sweet, delicious bonus points. You earn an extra life after a certain number of points, so these actually do serve a purpose. Like all Batman games subtitled as the video game, this game is obviously based on the 1989 movie starring Michael Keaton and Jack Nicholson, and it follows the movie more closely than the NES game. Again, outside of the part with the gun, of course, all the stages are based on key scenarios from the movie, like the Axis Chemical Factory stage that culminates in a boss battle with Jack Napier, ending with him plunging into a vat of chemicals. The story progresses through a number of between-stage cutscenes, which, while obviously simplistic, are clearly directly inspired by scenes from the movie. The gameplay even switches up in the middle of the game with a couple of shooter-inspired Batwing stages, where you'll clean up the skies of Gotham by taking down the Joker's balloons and his inexplicably robust armada of jets and helicopters. The game returns to the platformer style in the last couple of stages as you work your way through the cathedral towards the final boss fight against the Joker. Now, don't be fooled by the game's quaint art style and stage design. With the variety of hidden power-ups and branching routes through the stages, there's enough depth here to keep you engaged through to the end. Difficulty-wise, this is probably one of the easiest games Sunsoft has ever made, but it's challenging enough not to be a complete cakewalk, especially in the final stage, which tests your platforming skills with the trickiest jumps and the most dickish enemy placements in the game, all while the stage automatically scrolls to the left. Last but certainly not least, the soundtrack is fantastic, which should honestly come as no surprise. I mean, this is a Sunsoft game after all. Superman is often said to be the worst game on the N64, and it doesn't seem to be much better on the Game Boy. Both games were developed by Titus, who, as far as I know, didn't create a single good game in the 20 years they were active. But I don't know this for a fact. Are there any decent Titus games I should check out? Let me know. Now, this game is based on the animated series from the mid-90s, and it's a very late release for the Game Boy, coming out in 1997. For comparison, Batman was released in 1990. It's also noteworthy as being a Super Game Boy enhanced game, which it clearly advertises right on the box. It really wants you to know that. Now, just for a bit of context, when certain games are played through the Super Game Boy adapter, they can tap into the extra power of the Super Nintendo to give the games extra features that you wouldn't have access to if you'd play the games on the original hardware. Now, these range from custom borders and additional colors to extra animations and control options. The best example is the Game Boy version of Space Invaders, which unlocks the Super Nintendo version of the game when you play it on the Super Game Boy. Now, as awesome as this clearly is, I'd be remiss if I didn't point out that in either case, it is still just Space Invaders. So this begs a question, what does Superman do when you play it on the Super Game Boy? Absolutely nothing. In fact, it does less than nothing since it locks you out of basic Super Game Boy customization features like the controller setup and the color palette menu. Granted, it does give you this incredibly basic custom border, but I'm not quite sure that's worth the trade-off. Now, I guess I would describe Superman as an action platformer, although it struggles to be either one of those. The action part is honestly pretty aggravating. Your main method of attack is this really short and awkward punch. The collision detection is so inconsistent that every time you try to attack an enemy, it's a complete crapshoot if you'll actually make contact. And regardless of whether you hit the enemy or not, you're still likely to take damage yourself. A more reliable method to take out enemies is to punch their bullets back at them. But not every enemy shoots at you, so this isn't a strategy that works all the way through the game. Now, as a platformer, Superman doesn't fare much better. Superman does not jump, so the only way to move from one platform to the next is by flying. By holding down what would be the jump button if the game had one, Superman ascends continuously. As soon as you release a button, you drop to the ground. There are several times when the game wants you to fly and attack enemies at the same time, but this is a maneuver that's incredibly tricky to pull off. You're either trying to land a punch while moving upward, or you're trying to land one on the way back down. There's a couple flight sequences in the game where you have to dodge or reflect enemy fire while simultaneously maintaining your flight. Every time you take a hit, you drop to the bottom of the screen, but trying to punch enemies or their bullets also makes you fall. So at some point you realize that the safest strategy is just to hug the top of the screen and hope for the best. I don't know, I just really don't understand why Superman is so weak in this game. He's the Man of Steel, he's like famous for being bulletproof. So why does he take damage when he even touches an enemy? Now back to those flight levels, if you fall below the bottom of the screen, that's an instant death. So I gotta ask, what is the logic of having bottomless pits in a Superman game? Anytime he flies, he has to land at some point, right? So what's the difference between falling and just coming back down to the ground? Yeah, I know. Because video game. I just don't think it's unreasonable to expect that even a video game version of Superman wouldn't have the exact same weaknesses of every other video game character out there. The objective of every stage is to collect keys. Even when that's not the object of the stage, it's still the primary objective. Some stages are more maze-like and require a bit of exploration to hunt down all the required keys, and that's fine. But some stages don't even offer the option to explore. I mean, it's not even part of the mechanics. I'm referring again to the auto-scrolling flight levels. In those stages, you still have to collect keys, but they're just right there at the end waiting for you. So why even have them in this stage? Once you've gotten about halfway through the game, you've literally seen everything it offers. After that, it just starts repeating all the environments again, just laid out a bit differently. There's only 2 boss battles in the game, both against Lex Luthor in his exoskeleton thing. The first one is ridiculously easy. I'm not even sure he even attacks you. I just started punching him and bouncing him back, and eventually I won. For the final boss fight, I was expecting a bit more of a challenge, like maybe some additional attacks, or at the very least, a more elaborate pattern than just slowly walking towards Superman. But no, it was identical to the first fight. And of course, even after defeating the final boss of the game, you still have to fly up and grab that key and make your way to the exit. And here you go, I beat the game so you don't have to play it. There aren't even any end credits, just a simple no-frills congratulations screen. Absolutely minimal effort. Titus should be ashamed of themselves. The kindest thing I'm gonna say about this game is that there actually is somewhere out there a game that can be considered the worst game on the Game Boy. I don't think this is it though. So far, however, this is probably the worst Game Boy game that I've actually played. If there's an overall theme for the games that I'm talking about today, it would be inspired by the first Tim Burton Batman movie. It can't be understated what a huge deal that movie was at the time. Not only did it receive several video game tie-ins, one of which I've already talked about today, but it was also the inspiration for the animated series, which, side note, was even better than the original movie. I think we can all agree on that much. Batman the Animated Series was itself successful enough to inspire several other animated series, most notably Superman, upon which the second game of today was based, for better or worse. Bottom line, if the 1989 Batman movie hadn't been such a monster hit, I don't believe we would have gotten a shitty Game Boy game based on a 90s style animated Superman series. Likewise, I don't believe we would have gotten a television series based on The Flash. Now, as a kid, I think I only watched a few episodes of The Flash, but I remember liking it a lot. As I recall, it was dark like the Batman movie, and Danny Elfman even composed the main title theme. And get this, Mark Hamill even cameoed on a couple episodes as the Trickster, a character I know nothing about.
My pal, The Flash.
Anyways, long story short, I'm sure the actual history of the Flash TV series is probably a bit more complicated than I'm making it right now, but I'm quite certain it was at least partly influenced by a certain breakout superhero film from 1989 starring Michael Keaton and Jack Nicholson. Now, according to my notes, on August 8th of 2011, I purchased an eBay lot titled Game Boy with Fanny Pack Mario 123++. This game was one of the pluses. And in case you're wondering, yes, I of course still have the fanny pack.
It'd be funny if it weren't so pathetic. No, what the heck, I'll laugh anyway.
Now, despite being one of the earliest games in my Game Boy collection, the first time I'll really be playing this game will be specifically for this video. I don't know anything about it. It's gotta be better than Superman though, you would think. Alright, I'm gonna level with you. This game is not especially great, but it's actually not that bad either. The game's story is that the Trickster has placed a number of bombs around the city, and Barry Allen, aka The Flash, has to race through each level and disarm them. And that's the ultimate goal of every single level in the game, getting to the end of the stage before the bomb explodes. Every stage is another bomb at another location in the city, and Barry is helpful enough to give you the address of each location before the stage begins. I guess in case you want to track his progress on Google Earth or something. The controls are weird. The B button punches and the A button kicks. I guess it's nice to have offensive options, but these options come at the expense of a convenient jump function. You have to press up to jump, like it's a fighting game or something. This is not ideal. I'd gladly sacrifice one of these attacks to have a proper jump button. By pressing A and B together while you're running, you enter kind of a flash mode, where you run super fast and you can break through certain walls and pillars. Pressing A and B without moving will do this cool flash spin kick. These flash moves drain your energy meter. That's the big bar here at the bottom of the screen. The smaller bar is your health. Defeated enemies will drop a flash icon, which you'd think would refill your energy. That would make sense, but no, it refills your health. You refill your energy by eating food from vending machines, but this food isn't free. You have to buy it by using money you find in the stage. The more money you have when you access the vending machines, the better food you could buy and the more energy it refills. I actually like that mechanic a lot. That's pretty true to what I remember from the show. Also true to the show is the title theme, which is a very nice 8-bit rendition of Danny Elfman's theme. The rest of the music is also surprisingly decent. There's nothing here that I want to listen to outside the game, but overall the music was definitely one of the game's highlights. As for the rest of the game, it stays true to THQ's legacy of producing licensed games that are just good enough. There's a few cool mechanics to make this game feel somewhat unique and interesting, and like I said, the music was a little better than I expected. But the rest of the game is pretty mundane. Not quite bad enough to be offensive, but just like Superman, by the third or fourth stage, you've pretty much seen everything the game has to offer. At this point, the environments just start repeating themselves, and the ticking time bomb premise of every stage has worn pretty thin. The Trickster appears in nearly every stage as a completely avoidable and therefore pointless boss fight, and the stage design heavily favors blind jumps into bottomless pits. Now, this is an easy game to recommend at least trying out. There are definitely worse games you could play on the Game Boy. But there's no shortage of better games also, so I wouldn't hold it against you if you played one of those games instead. So 3 games down and many, many more to go. In the next episode, we'll take a look at 3 more Game Boy games, but in the meantime, thank you for watching The Good, The Bad, and The Game Boy.